What's up everyone, my name's Robbie, this is Robbie and Manila, and today we're talking about how my 2021 sector calls have performed. For those of you new to my channel, let's get you up to date with what's going on. So back in 2020, I made 2 videos about sector ETFs, and basically I made calls about what I thought was going to happen in 2021. That's what we're going over today. So the first video I made was about my sector calls on the 11 different sectors. And then after I made that video, I made another video going through which sectors I was overweight and which I was underweight. And I actually purchased those with M1 Finance and created a pie. So what we're doing in today's video is we're gonna go through the different sector calls I made back in 2020, how they performed in 2021, where I was wrong, and where I was right. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Okay, so before we get started, I need something from you. So in the comments below, leave a little comment and let me know if I should make another 2022 sector ETF video. So made one for 2021. Do you want to know my calls for 2022? And should that be my next video? So if that's what you want, leave a little comment and let me know. So if I get enough of those comments, that'll be my next video. So first, we're talking about my failures, where I failed in 2021 in my sector picks. So the first few of these ETFs are the ones that I didn't pick correctly. So first off, we have basic materials, aka natural resources. I was underweight this sector. I thought this sector was going to not do as well as the overall S&P 500 index or as the total stock market. So I was underweight. The total portion of the S&P 500 index that is in this material sector is 2.7% of all of the S&P 500. So it's not a very big sector comparatively inside the S&P 500 index, but I said I'm gonna underweight this. So I just did 1% instead of 2.7%. I used the sector ETF that's called FMAT or FMAT. And so the return of the S&P 500 in 2021 was 26.9%. So that's what we're gonna base all of our ideas today are that the sector I chose if I chose it to be overweight, it should have beat 26.9%. And if I chose it to be underweight, it should have been less. So this one, I chose it underweight, but it actually did better than the S&P 500, so 27.3%. So I would actually call that market perform / outperform, and I should have been either equally weighted or I should have been overweighted in this one, but I was underweighted, so I was incorrect. The next important part about this is how the actual sector ETF that I picked performed. So the sector ETF that I picked did 27.6%, so it was very close to the actual sector return of 27.3%. That was the ETF, ticker FMAT. So I'm happy with the ETF that I ended up using. So that was all good. So next up, what is the next sector that I got wrong? So the next one is communication services. I was equal weight communication services. So the S&P 500 has 11.2% of its overall weighting inside this sector, and I equally weighted it. So I also put 11.2% of my portfolio inside the sector. To do that, I used ETF called FHLC, that's the ticker, and the S&P 500 return, of course, we know is 26.9%, and the sector return was 16.0%. So I should have been underweight this, but I was equal weight, so I was wrong on that one. The ETF that I picked was very close to the sector return, 15.9%, so happy with the ETF I used. Moving on to my next incorrect call was healthcare. So I was overweight healthcare 2021, and the S&P weighting of the healthcare sector is 14.1%. I went with 19%. So I went overweight healthcare. I used the sector ETF, ticker FHLC. The S&P return, S&P 500, of course, 26.9%. The sector return was 26.1%. So it really was a market perform. This next part is very important, so pay attention here because my sector ETF actually did not perform very well. So the sector ETF I picked for this one, FHLC, did not do as well as the sector. It underperformed the sector, which means that my return wasn't as good. So I had 20% return for my sector ETF, but I probably should have had around a 26.1% return. So I, in this one, ended up really underperforming, and that actually hurt my ability to beat the S&P 500. So let's move on to the next one. My next ETF that I got wrong was technology. I guess I was feeling contrarian at the time, I wanted to go against the crowd, go against the market, pave my own way or something like that. So I was underweight technology when, of course, as everyone probably knows, technology did a very good job in 2021. So 27.4% is the weighting of the S&P 500. It's the largest sector of the S&P 500. I went with a 23% weighting for my portfolio, so underweight by a few percentage points. And the sector ETF I used was XSW. The S&P return, of course, is 26.9, but the sector return was 34.2. So I definitely should have gone overweight this one, and I went underweight. Now, similar to healthcare, this one's more important. You got to pay attention to this because it's crazy what happened. Made all of these sector ETF videos just recently. What's the best sector ETF? You've probably maybe seen some of those. So pay attention to those videos. I'm happy I made those because now I'm going to go back and make sure I always use those sector ETFs that I picked. Because here, I didn't do the research to figure out which sector ETF I should buy when I was making the video. I just got one that said technology in it, like an idiot, of course. So XSW is an ETF I should not have picked. I shouldn't have picked this ETF for my tech sector ETF. If you remember my What's the Best Tech Sector ETF video, I picked VGT as the best tech sector ETF. That would have given me a way better return than what happened here. So unfortunately, this ETF had a 7.6% return. It's like, I don't know what I was doing. It was really stupid. So I had a 7.6% return. The market had a 34.2% return. I should have had that at least. Sorry, not the market, the tech sector. So I should have had this at least. If I had VGT like I had picked in my video, I would have gotten very close to this. This drastically made my portfolio underperform because it's the largest part of the S&P 500, 27.4%. I had 23% of my portfolio in it, and I only got a 7% return when I should have gotten a 34% return. This just killed me. It killed the whole thing. Like, if I had done this correctly, I would have outperformed the market. Because of this, I didn't. So these are the 4 sectors I got incorrect. So let's take a look now at the ones I got right. So first we have the energy sector. So energy was 2% of the S&P 500. I went with 8%. I did a big overweight on this one because I was really confident about the energy sector. I used FENY as the sector ETF. The S&P return, of course, 26.9. This had a 53.4% return, so I was very happy that I went with this as an overweight position. 55.5% was the sector ETF I used. Next up, we have financial services. So financial services, the S&P weight is 9.9%. My portfolio, I went a little bit overweight with 11% in financials. FNCL is the ETF that I used for this one. Of course, the S&P 500 return was 26.9. Financials had a great year, 35% return, so I was very happy that I put money in this one. And the ETF I picked for this had a 35.1% return, so did a good job on that one. Next, we have utilities. I was correct on utilities. It's 3.1% of the S&P 500 index. I went with 0 on this one because I didn't think utilities was going to have a very good year. FUTY was the sector ETF. So the sector return of utilities, 17.7%, so underperforming the 26.9% of the market. Sector return for my ETF was 17.4, so I did a good job on that one. Next, we have the real estate sector, and real estate is 2.6% of the S&P 500. I went with 4%. I overweighted it. The sector ETF I used was FREL. We know the S&P 500 return 26.9, and the sector return was 46.2%. So very good job for the real estate sector. And my ETF actually didn't do as well, 40.5%. So again, I didn't capture as much as I should have on the upside by getting the correct ETF to actually get the best return on this one. Next, we have industrials. So in industrials, 8.4% of the market S&P 500 is industrials. 6%, I underweighted it. FIDU is the sector ETF I used. S&P return 26.9, sector return 21.1, so it did underperform, so I was correct on this one. The sector ETF return was 20.8, so not too bad, I was happy about that. Next one I was correct about was consumer defensive or consumer staples. 7% of the S&P is in this sector. I went underweight with 4% of my portfolio. IYK is the ETF I used. S&P return 26.9, sector return 17.3, so I was correct by underweighting this one. The sector ETF return that I used was 17.3, so exactly the same, so awesome. And finally, we have the consumer discretionary sector, aka consumer cyclical. 11.6% was the weighting of the S&P 500. My portfolio is 13%, so I overweighted consumer discretionary. XLY is the ETF that I used for this one. Versus the S&P 500, it had 28% return, so outperforming the S&P 500. I was able to capture all of the return pretty much with my ETF XLY on this one. All right, so how did I end up doing in 2021? So first off, my batting average. So I want to always make sure that I at least have more correct calls than I have incorrect calls. That's probably the most important part about this whole thing. So I had 4 missed calls and 7, we'll call it hits. So I had a basically batting average of 57%, which I'm happy with. So over 50% is what I would aim for. So I'm glad about that. But let's see where things kind of went wrong. So for materials, for example, the sector performance versus the S&P 500 was 0.4%. 0.7% was how my ETF did. So S&P 500, 0.4, my ETF, 0.7. And that's what we're looking at here. So communications, I was close, -11, -10. -6.9 for healthcare. So I was way off on healthcare. I lost a lot of basically return on this one. And I lost a ton of return on the tech sector. So -19.3% return was what my ETF ended up having versus the S&P 500. And the sector did 7.3% better than the S&P 500. So this right here just killed me. Taking a look at my correct calls, we can see pretty much everything is very similar. So the ETFs weren't too bad on this one. Besides real estate, I did lose out on some return on real estate. So again, like I said, those sector videos I made, I would definitely make sure that you watch those things. I think they're really going to help you. If you do something like this, getting the correct sector is a very important part. So make sure that you watch those videos and pick the right sector basically. So that's all we have for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Hit that like button if you like this. Subscribe if you want to see future content like this. And of course, watch another one of my videos coming up on the end screen right now.